The morning of December 7th, 1941, began like any other for the sailors, soldiers, and airmen stationed at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The sun rose over calm waters, with ships of the U.S. Pacific Fleet anchored in neat rows, their crews going about their routines. Few imagined that within hours the tranquility would turn into fire, smoke, and destruction that would mark one of the darkest days in American history. Far across the Pacific, the Japanese fleet was already moving with precision. Carriers, cruisers, and destroyers cut through the waves, carrying squadrons of aircraft that had been carefully prepared for the mission. The plan was daring: cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet in one sudden strike, buying Japan the freedom to expand across Asia and the Pacific without interference. The attack was timed with precision, set to unleash chaos before the United States could react. Just before 8 p.m., the first wave of Japanese planes broke through the morning sky. Bombers, torpedo planes, and fighters screamed down toward the harbor, their engines echoing like thunder. Sailors looked up in disbelief, thinking at first it was some kind of drill, but the whistle of falling bombs and the sudden explosions made the reality unmistakable. Battleships lined along Battleship Row became instant targets, and the harbor erupted in flames. The USS Arizona was struck by a massive bomb that detonated its forward magazines, causing a catastrophic explosion. The ship was engulfed in fire and sank almost instantly, taking more than 1,000 men with her. The USS Oklahoma capsized under the weight of multiple torpedo hits, trapping hundreds of sailors inside. Across the harbor, the USS West Virginia, California, and other battleships were hammered by torpedoes and bombs. Plumes of black smoke billowed high into the sky as the harbor turned into a graveyard. On the airfields, Japanese fighters strafed planes lined neatly on runways, destroying them before they could get airborne. Hangars and barracks were set ablaze, and soldiers scrambled for weapons to fight back. Some American pilots managed to launch their aircraft and engage the enemy, but they were vastly outnumbered. Anti-aircraft guns finally roared to life, filling the skies with bursts of fire, yet the first wave had already inflicted devastating damage. Then the second wave came. More bombs, more torpedoes, more destruction. The attack lasted less than 2 hours, but by the time the last Japanese planes turned back toward their carriers, Pearl Harbor lay in ruins. Battleships were sunk or burning, cruisers and destroyers were damaged, and hundreds of aircraft were destroyed on the ground. More than 2,400 Americans were killed, and thousands more wounded. As the smoke cleared and survivors searched for comrades, the enormity of the attack sank in. The Pacific Fleet had been dealt a crushing blow, and the United States had been struck without warning. Yet amid the devastation, the resolve of the American people hardened. The attack that was meant to weaken their spirit instead ignited a fierce determination. The following day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed the nation, declaring December 7th as a date which will live in infamy. The United States, once hesitant to join the global conflict, now stood united in purpose. The shock of Pearl Harbor turned into a call to arms, and America marched into World War II with a resolve that would shape the fate of nations. What was meant to be a quick strike that kept the United States at bay became the spark that brought it fully into the war. Pearl Harbor was not just a battle, it was the moment that changed the course of history, a day that truly shocked the world. The surprise Japanese assault on Pearl Harbor devastated the U.S. Pacific Fleet, sinking battleships, destroying aircraft, and killing thousands in less than 2 hours. The morning of December 7th, 1941, began quietly on the island of Oahu. The sailors aboard the U.S. Battleships and destroyers were preparing for another routine Sunday, many of them still at breakfast or just waking up. The ships of the Pacific Fleet rested calmly in the harbor, their presence a symbol of American naval strength in the Pacific. Yet beneath this calm exterior, danger was already approaching fast across the skies. Japan had planned its strike with absolute precision, launching its attack force from carriers positioned in the Pacific Ocean. The aim was simple but bold: cripple the Pacific Fleet before it could respond to Japanese expansion across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. At 7:55 a.m., the first wave of Japanese planes descended upon the harbor. Torpedo bombers skimmed the water's surface, dropping deadly weapons aimed at the mighty battleships anchored along Battleship Row. Dive bombers plunged from the clouds, releasing explosives onto the decks of ships and airfields. Fighters strafed the ground with machine gun fire, targeting anything that moved. The attack was overwhelming in its suddenness and ferocity. Many sailors and soldiers initially believed it was part of a drill, but the thunder of explosions and the towering columns of smoke quickly shattered that illusion. The USS Arizona suffered the most catastrophic blow. A bomb pierced her deck and detonated her forward magazines, triggering a massive explosion that ripped the ship apart. In moments, she was engulfed in fire, and over 1,000 men were lost with her as she sank beneath the burning waters. Nearby, the USS Oklahoma was struck by multiple torpedoes. She capsized within minutes, trapping hundreds of sailors inside her hull, many of whom could only be heard pounding on the steel walls as they fought desperately for life. Other battleships met similar fates. The USS West Virginia was hit by torpedoes and bombs, sinking to the harbor's floor. The USS California, also struck repeatedly, was left in flames and slowly sinking. Even ships that managed to stay afloat were badly damaged, their decks scarred, their guns destroyed, and their crews decimated. Battleship Row, the pride of the American fleet, had become a scene of devastation, with oil fires spreading across the water and massive plumes of smoke rising into the sky. The destruction was not limited to the ships. On nearby airfields, rows of U.S. planes were lined up wingtip to wingtip, vulnerable and exposed. Japanese fighters tore through them with machine gun fire, while bombs reduced hangars and runways to rubble. Nearly 200 aircraft were destroyed on the ground before they had any chance of taking off. Only a few American pilots managed to get airborne, engaging the enemy in fierce dogfights, but they were vastly outnumbered. The chaos lasted less than 2 hours, but the toll it left behind was staggering. More than 2,400 Americans were killed, with over 1,000 more wounded. 18 ships were sunk or heavily damaged, including 8 battleships. The Pacific Fleet, which had been a cornerstone of U.S. naval power, lay in ruins. The harbor waters were littered with twisted metal, burning oil, and the bodies of men who had never expected to face battle that day. Survivors, stunned and heartbroken, searched desperately for comrades in the wreckage, many risking their own lives to pull others from the infernos. The Japanese had executed their plan with ruthless efficiency, believing they had delivered a fatal blow to the American Navy. In under 2 hours, they had inflicted one of the most devastating attacks in U.S. military history. For the men at Pearl Harbor, the morning had begun in peace and ended in horror. Their world turned upside down by a surprise assault that left scars, both physical and emotional. Ainsley. This devastating strike on Pearl Harbor was more than just a military attack. It was a shocking event that changed the course of history. The destruction of battleships, the loss of aircraft, and the death of thousands in such a short span of time marked December 7 as a day never to be forgotten. The devastation was meant to weaken America's will, but instead it forged a determination that would alter the future of the war and the world. The attack, meant to cripple American power, instead united the United States, propelling it into World War II with unshakable resolve. In the hours after the Japanese planes disappeared over the horizon, leaving Pearl Harbor in ruins, shock and disbelief spread across the island of Oahu. Survivors pulled comrades from the burning waters, medics tended to the wounded, and families in nearby communities rushed to hospitals, bringing food, blankets, and blood donations. The nation, which had watched the war in Europe and Asia with caution from afar, suddenly felt the war's flames at its doorstep. In Washington, D.C., President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his cabinet quickly realized that the United States could no longer remain on the sidelines. What had been an effort to avoid war became, in an instant, a fight for survival and justice. Until that morning, America had been deeply divided over whether to enter the global conflict. Many citizens wanted to avoid the bloodshed that had scarred the world during the First World War just 2 decades earlier. Isolationist voices argued that Europe's wars were not America's wars, but the destruction at Pearl Harbor shattered that debate overnight. The loss of more than 2,400 American lives, the sinking of proud battleships, and the smoking ruins of airfields left no room for hesitation. The nation's sense of security had been torn apart, and its anger was now united against a common enemy. On December 8th, the day after the attack, President Roosevelt addressed Congress and the American people in a speech that would echo through history. He declared December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. His words captured the raw grief and outrage of a nation, but they also carried a powerful message of resolve. The attack, he said, was deliberate and unprovoked, and the United States had no choice but to defend itself. Congress responded with overwhelming support, declaring war on Japan with only one dissenting vote. For the first time, the American people stood together, unified in purpose and fueled by a determination that nothing could break. This unity extended beyond the political halls of Washington. Across the country, young men lined up at recruiting stations, eager to enlist and fight. Factories that had produced cars, appliances, and consumer goods quickly shifted gears to build tanks, planes, and weapons. Women stepped into roles traditionally reserved for men, working in shipyards, aircraft plants, and munitions factories, becoming the backbone of America's industrial war machine. The entire nation transformed into an engine of war, channeling its grief and anger into action. The Japanese had believed that a swift and overwhelming strike would paralyze the United States, buying Japan time to consolidate its empire across the Pacific. Instead, the opposite occurred. The destruction at Pearl Harbor galvanized the American people, forging a unity that even the nation's greatest internal debates could not weaken. Rather than paralyze the United States, the attack unleashed its full strength. Within months, new ships rolled off the docks, new aircraft filled the skies, and new armies trained for the fight ahead. The attack also changed America's role in the world forever. No longer was the United States a reluctant observer of global affairs. It had become a central player. The declaration of war against Japan was quickly followed by Germany and Italy declaring war on the United States. The conflict that had been raging across continents now became a truly global war, with America fully engaged. Pearl Harbor was the turning point that brought the nation from isolation into action, thrusting it into the heart of World War II. The resolve forged in those dark hours would carry the United States through years of grueling battles in the Pacific, from the jungles of Guadalcanal to the black sands of Iwo Jima, and across Europe, from the beaches of Normandy to the heart of Germany. Every victory that followed was fueled by the memory of Pearl Harbor, by the determination to honor those who had fallen in the surprise attack. What was meant to break America instead bound it together. The Japanese had struck with the hope of crushing the Pacific Fleet and silencing U.S. power. Instead, they awakened a nation that would rise stronger than ever before. The devastation of Pearl Harbor united the United States in a way few events ever had, propelling it into World War II with a fierce resolve that would not rest until victory was secured. Out of the smoke and ruin of Pearl Harbor, a new resolve was born. What began as a day of devastation became the spark that awakened the United States to its full strength. The sunken battleships, the burning planes, and the lives lost were not the end of American power, but the beginning of a fight that would stretch across oceans and continents. The attack that was meant to weaken the nation instead forged its unity, transforming grief into determination and shock into action. From that day forward, America carried the memory of Pearl Harbor as both a wound and a rallying cry, driving it toward a victory that would reshape the destiny of the world.